Buongiorno, once again. You already know me, I'm Salvatore. I want to welcome you back to our little series of the history of the castle. So today I'm going to share with you the uniqueness of what is my favorite suite in the entire castle, which is what we call the Contessa Suite. So right here is the sitting room. As you can see, very much an old world feel to it. And then of course, the sitting room is divided from the bedroom area, which we will walk to next. And it's divided by a series of doors, the first, the other, and then a door leading into the bathroom and into an area which is also an extension of the bathroom that has a second sink. So it's ideal for a couple where one could be brushing his teeth, the other one is taking a shower. There's a bit of sense of intimacy as well. So now we enter this incredible space, which is just so full of decoration that I'm going to be sharing a little bit its history. But first I wanted you to enjoy and to get a sense of this incredible view. Look at the bougainville, which is in full bloom. The bougainville does remain in bloom for most of the summertime. So, we're going to talk a little bit about the evolution of the decoration in this room, because this is something very, very interesting. First of all, you know, the building itself, this is the newer part of the castle. New in a certain sense of the word, because new is hardly a definition for it. When we consider that the actual structure, the bones in this building, do go back to the 14th century, to the 1300s. Of course, through the centuries, it has been modified many, many, many times. What interests us, of course, is the evolution the building took once the Gori Martinis took over the property in the 15th century, in the 1400s. And they made many, many, many alterations. Now, what is really interesting in this particular room, and most of the alterations that have occurred, have to deal with the concept of keeping up with the times, which is a concept that we share very much today. You know, when we own a home, after 30, 40 years, the next generation takes it over, tastes have changed and altered. So of course, the next generation modifies. So they redo, or as we oftentimes say, they redecorate the interiors. This is certainly the case of what has happened here. In the 1700s, what we refer to from a historical point of view as the Age of Enlightenment. Because you see, even decorations, even how we build and how we decorate, has to do with who man is at the time that he is creating these from an architectural point of view, from an artistic point of view. So imagine that in the 1700s, we were coming from an era which had been known as the Baroque, which later, of course, the French took into extremes, calling it the Rococo. Everyone knows this is an era where the concept is incredible decoration, activity, movement, life. And the reason for this is because the Baroque was an attempt to fight the Reformation. You see, the Reformation had been no more images, no more saints, none of those things, simple walls, none of that. Eliminate everything, eliminate all access. Well, then it was thought that perhaps because of the fact that the church had lost lots of the people attending the places of worship, because they had suddenly become, they wanted them to be nullified from all of the excesses. So it was thought that it would be a great idea to create theatrics, because theatrics draws people back. This is the consequence of why the Baroque eventually came into being. Well, you know, a century or two of that sufficed for then the enlightened minds to understand that we had gone to excess. particularly with the Rococo. So it was decided that human nature had to be in accordance with nature itself. Therefore, nothing had to be in excess. There had to be a sense of balance. And this is what the 18th century, what we in Italy call the Settecento, the 18th century, or the Age of Enlightenment, is about. So imagine this room in the 18th century. This door is original from that period. Okay? You'll notice very somber, muted beige color, simple golden trimming around it. Look, simple. Now, imagine that this door is original. The rest of what you see has been modified. But let's think of how it was when this door, as we see it, how the rest of the room was. No decorations on the walls. In the ceiling, which is now so ornate, in the 1700s, the only thing that was there were those 4 incredibly beautiful angels. As you can see, the 4 of them. And where the apse is, where now there are the floral decorations with all of those intricate little details, in the 1700s, there was a simple line of gold gilt. So imagine a room with muted colors, this simple off-white base with nothing but those 4 cupids. Imagine how light. You see that perfect sense of balance. It felt as if though you were in a cloud in the heavens. The Age of Enlightenment. But then again, time lapsed. The 1840s came into being. And in the 1840s, it was time to redecorate the room. It was a little too simple. This is pre-Victorian era. So what happened? They called in a decorator and they entrusted in him the idea to make it a little more ornate. What did he do? He painted those incredible bouquets of flowers. Look at that. By the way, that is freehand. See, those are really artistic works. And if you notice from one bouquet to the other, which are showing different types of flowers, from tulips to gladiolas to roses, each one of those, violets, each one of those is a composition, one different from the other. So even in that, at that period, in 1840, this room would have still been absolutely gorgeous because it would have had those angels with just these flowers. Okay, as I said, the Victorian era comes into being. You know, during the Victorian era, the concept was more is good. The more you do, the more appealing it is. Very different from our concept nowadays of minimalism, where less is more. So what happened? They called in, and this is a time when these aristocrats, remember this belonged to that very wealthy family called the Gori Martinis. These aristocrats wanted to keep up with the times. This is a time when many of these ancient families, they wanted to restore their castles to give them that Gothic feeling, that feeling of the heraldry of the medieval ages, where lots of significance with little details. So what do? They call in yet another one. This time, a very well-known interior decorator, the most famous of Europe, from the Academy of Siena, a gentleman by the name of Brunacci. In the end of the 1800s, from the mid to the end of the 1800s, he was one of the most important names in terms of interior design. He was sought by many people throughout Europe. And this family, who had the means, commissioned him to come and to redo, to add details so as to give this castle a sense of the medieval era. It is in that point where we begin the stencil decoration of the ceiling, so that you see beyond the flowers, separating the flowers, Then there was this addition of all these little geometric designs. As you can see them, it enriches, it makes it much more detailed, although in my personal opinion, it takes away from the refinement of the beauty of what this ceiling might have been at the time. Another 30, 40, 50 years go by, the next generation is tired of seeing the same thing. So probably around 1910, 1915 or 1920s, they call in another decorator. And he comes in, and what does he do? He creates this illusion of wallpaper on the walls. Now, if we look at it, my goodness, so intricate, geometry, so rich, almost to the point of excess. One would almost ask himself, nowadays we might refer to somebody being on a trip if somebody had created something like this. Yet, when it's all put together, it blends in so incredibly beautiful. And the reason it does that is because of the fact that it creates a harmonious atmosphere of richness, of wealth, of layers of history, one on top of the other. At the same time that they commissioned these, by the way, the family also commissioned drapery. Now, what you see is not the original drapery. However, the valances on which the drapery hangs are original indeed. And look at the canopy over the bed, beautiful, with a gold gilt. Look at the keys, which are the crest of the family. This is the canopy over the bed. This is why we call this the Contessa Suite, because this is where she slept. And the beautiful valance, look, with a harp. Those are truly works of art that are difficult to find nowadays, but luckily we were able to, they were still here, and we've been able to restore them to the original, as you can see. Beautiful bed frame. This was done by a recent decorator, always from Tuscany, which I feel is very, very, very talented. Anyway, the young lady who did these, because I will talk in the next video about these personal restorers, these restorers that we have used. The young lady who did this room and the anteroom that we saw previously, her name is Gloria Barbetti. She and her husband worked in this room. Quite frankly, they worked in this room for a very lengthy period of time. Imagine that for us to run the conduit, because you see, all the electrical had to be redone, the plumbing had to be redone. We had to actually saw portions of the plaster, take them out. And of course, pieces of this plaster were missing. Actually, the structure itself, of course, is made of brick and stone. Then there is the layer about this thick of stucco, and of course it is the stucco that is decorated. Well, imagine, my big fear was that that stucco could actually collapse on us, because there was a void between the stucco and that. So the restorers, this young lady and her husband, had to also do a physical, structural restoration before they worked on the pictorial restoration, which was quite an undertaking. And just those of you who come and stay here know that none of this has come cheap, so that when you contemplate the fact of the space that you are sleeping in when you go to stay somewhere, think also and consider the possibility of what it may have cost to create, to build, or to restore that particular space. So I'm going to share with you that only these two rooms, the anteroom and this room, actually cost me, only on pictorial restorations, 16,000 euros plus VAT. So on your next stay at the castle, when you consider the type of accommodation, which room you wish to stay, because so many of our repeating guests, each time they consider, so they experience the different feel of the different rooms, because that's what staying in a historical place actually means. So those of you who are lovers of the past, who want to have a sense of a layer of history, so that you can look at this and think, wow, imagine back then perhaps this might be the perfect room for you, the Contessa Suite. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time when we're going to talk about another one of the decorators that have worked in our castle.